Top stories in our news. Our Finance Minister, Ntobeko Msokotwane, is optimistic Zambia will secure debt relief by the end of March 2023. Nchelenge and Chipangali districts are the latest areas to record a cholera outbreak, and the Bank of Zambia has raised the monetary policy rate by 25 basis points to 9.25%. Minister of Finance and National Planning, Ntobeko Msokotwane, is optimistic that the country will secure debt relief by the end of March 2023. Speaking at a joint media briefing in Lusaka, Dr. Msokotwane has attributed the delay in getting debt relief to ongoing discussions among creditors. He says government is in contact with creditors and bondholders who are currently discussing the kind of debt relief to be given to Zambia and which debt should be considered for restricting. And Dr. Msokotwane says government acknowledges the high cost of living and is addressing it. He says among the measures government has taken to address the cost of living is lowering the price of a meal. Dr. Msokotwane states that government is using a twofold approach in addressing the cost of living, which is reducing inflation and promoting job creation through providing incentives to various sectors of development.
But ideas that were left behind a few moments ago. So the bills were presented to the Ministry of Finance and said, these are the arrears, can you please pay us? And the Ministry of the Treasury simply said, we can't just pay like that, we must verify these bills for authenticity. Remember again, we are coming from a period, just to give you an example, we are coming from a period where irregular payments were done in very significant amounts. Example of that, fertilizers. In 2021, we are told that all the fertilizers required by the country was delivered in the country and was paid for. That's what we were told. Okay? But when it was checked, and by the way, there was a lot of pressure on the president to say, go and launch the fertilizer distribution, But by that time, somebody had already whispered to us that these fertilizers that they came in full. In actual fact, yes, they were paid in full. But they did not deliver in full themselves.
Speaking at the same briefing, Information and Media Minister Chiushi Kasanda says Zambians are coming from a bad culture where they were used to easy money instead of working for it. Ms. Kasanda is encouraging co-citizens to form cooperatives and companies and supply goods and services to the government.
Comparison always has to be there. We need to remind the Zambians where we are coming from, where we are at, and where we are going. So that comparison will always be there. And also, you need to realize, we all have homes here. If a child spills milk on the floor, are you going to blame the maid who is coming to clean it up? You will definitely look at the child and tell the child, you have spilled that milk. So this is what we're trying to say is that, there were people who messed up this country. This country was on its knees, you all know that. This country bled for a very long time. And there were people who did that. There were people who were in these offices for 10 years and brought this country almost to a standstill. So what we are saying is that we are the ones who have to clean up the mess. We agree we're in full control. Yes, we're in office now, but there's cleaning up that needs to be done. And unfortunately, it cannot be done overnight. So the comparison will always be there. Whether here, as we have our press briefings, as we go out there, whether in Parliament, we'll always refer back to what our colleagues did. That is the only way the Zambians will also appreciate what we are doing, because they'll look at where we are coming from and where we are at right now.
Nchelenge and Chipangali districts in Luapula and Eastern provinces, respectively, have become the 4th and 5th districts in the country to be affected by cholera. Giving an update on the cholera situation in the country, Health Minister Sylvia Masebo said on 9th of February 2023, Nchelenge district recorded 3 cases of acute watery diarrhea from 3 health facilities, namely Nchelenge Urban Clinic, Kabuta Rural Health Center, and St. Paul's Mission Hospital. And out of the 3 stool samples sent to the laboratory for culture, 2 tested positive for Vibrio cholerae Inaba 01. Ms. Masebo says the index case is that of a 9-year-old female from Isokwe Island on Lake Mweru who was presented to Nchelenge Urban Clinic with acute watery diarrhea, and on the same day, a 25-year-old male presented to St. Paul's Mission Hospital with acute watery diarrhea, severe dehydration, and impaired consciousness, and died a few hours after admission. She states that in the last 24 hours, the country has recorded 9 new cases, with no new deaths recorded, with the cumulative incidence of cholera standing at 135, including 3 deaths, while those in admission are all stable. Ms. Masebo says government continues to make efforts in the fight against cholera and other diseases of public health concern. And the minister says the measles campaign, which took place in Pemba, Sinazongwe, Kafue, and Lusaka districts, was a success with over 100% coverage.
In Chipangadi District 1 and in Masabombwe 3 and 4 in Nchelenge District. 6 people distributed as follows: 1 in Chipata, 2 in Masabombwe, and 3 in Nchelenge have since been discharged, leaving only 8 in admission. The condition of the 8 are stable. All of them are in stable condition. Nationally, we have not recorded any new deaths, and therefore the cumulative incidence of cholera in the current outbreak is 135, including the 3 deaths that have so far been announced. Members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, the risk of cholera remains the same. That is consumption of water and eating food that is contaminated with the bacteria that causes cholera. The symptoms, the signs, again the same. They will include acute watery diarrhea and quite often vomiting. The disease will cause dehydration in the body, and if you don't get medical attention immediately, you may die.
The Bank of Zambia BOZ Monetary Policy Committee has raised the policy rate by 25 basis points to 9.25% from 9%. Announcing the decision of the Monetary Policy Committee, which met on 13th and 14th of February 2023, Bank of Zambia Governor Denny Karialia states that in arriving at the decision, the committee took into account inflation projections showing a build-up in inflationary pressures, the overall impact of the recent increase in the statutory reserves ratio to mitigate volatility in foreign exchange markets, the moderation in vulnerabilities in the financial sector, among others. Dr. Kalialia says inflation is projected to increase and remain above the 6.8% target range, in sharp contrast to the earlier projection in November 2022 that inflation would return to the target range in the first quarter of 2024. He says inflation is now projected to average 11.1% in 2023 compared to the November 2022 forecast of 8.5%, adding that inflation is forecast to average 10.1% in 2024. Dr. Kalialia states that the factors underlying the forecast include the recent rapid depreciation of the kwacha against the US dollar, the anticipated increase in electricity tariffs to cost-reflective levels, and possible reduction in maize production due to, among other factors, adverse weather conditions and crop infestation by 4 armyworms.
Aspect that we took into account is that on the 1st February, because of the pressures that we have observed in the foreign exchange market, we did raise the statutory reserve ratio on all deposits of commercial banks by 2.5 percentage points. I think in the circular announcing that, we did indicate what prompted us to make that decision. Now, we recognize that this measure is just taken effect. As a matter of fact, the observance of that measure began this past Monday. So this adjustment we have just announced of the 25 basis points comes on top of that. And this is one of the reasons we felt that the adjustment has to be minimal as possible to complement the area measure that we took, as its effect has yet to be fully realized. Now, the other thing that we took into account is that the financial sector is now experiencing some moderation in the vulnerabilities, and that gives us confidence that the adjustment will not adversely affect the financial sector to the extent that it becomes unstable.
And Dr. Kalaria says that the persistent depreciation of the kwacha is being driven by low foreign exchange supply, particularly from the mining sector amidst high demand by market players for various purposes, including critical imports of fuel, medicines, and agricultural inputs. He adds that foreign financial institutions that had typically been suppliers of foreign exchange are now more pronounced on the demand side as they are divesting from the domestic market. Dr. Kalaria says in an effort to stabilize the foreign exchange market, the bank augmented its support and provided $443.5 million, largely from mining tax receipts, compared to the provision of $333.5 million in the third quarter. Meanwhile, Dr. Kalaria says the current account, which had recently been robust, has weakened with adverse implications in the foreign exchange market.
But what we have observed too is that in the past, we had these foreign financials who come to participate in our domestic bonds and treasury bills. They used to bring in some dollars into the market, which would help to augment the supply of dollars. This time around, what we are seeing is that they are coming on the demand side more than on the supply side. Now, one of the underlying factors to that is this delayed restructuring exercise which is going on. But quite apart from the delay itself, there is this pressure to loop in the non-domestic holders of domestic debt into that. So what that is doing is that those who would like to come into the market are scared to do so for fear that if they did, this may be part of the restructuring exercise. Then doesn't end there. Those who are in are also not renewing their investments in our treasury bills. So when they mature, some of those are opting to cash in that.
Ministry of Science and Technology has concluded the formulation of the revised Information Communications Technology Policy. Felix Mtati, the minister in charge, says the revised policy has, among other things, incorporated affordable access to technological devices by the members of the public. Mr. Mtati says the revised policy will now be taken to Cabinet for approval. Details in the following report. Police have arrested 38 people for trespassing on military land located in Akashitu area of Kapirimposhi district. The 38, who include 17 females that trespassed on the 42 Zambia Army Battle Training Area by way of squatting and cutting down trees. Police Deputy Spokesperson Danny Mwale says police instituted investigations following a report of people settling on military land, and on February 14, 2023, around 09 hours, 38 people were picked from the Army training area in Kashitu. Mr. Mwale says that the suspects are all detained in police custody, charged with the offense of criminal trespass. Meanwhile, 20 suspected junkies have been arrested for idle and disorderly in Chawama compound. Mr. Mwale says that this follows an operation targeting junkies after several complaints of attacks by members of the community in Chawama compound. He says the suspects, all males aged between 10 and 40, are detained in police custody, awaiting to be formally charged. Local Government and Rural Development Minister Gary Nkombo has with immediate effect lifted the suspension of Kafue Town Council and findings of the preliminary investigations into alleged illegal allocation of land at Kafue Town Council point to numerous irregularities in land administration. Speaking at a media briefing where he announced the lifting of the suspension, Mr. Nkombo says other findings include double allocation of plots, lack of transparency in land administration, allocation of land without following procedure, use of unauthorized person to do layout plans, and lack of database for land under the jurisdiction of the local authority. He says this will, in his regard, and he says he will, in his regard, undertake measures to ensure that all the irregularities highlighted are addressed as soon as possible. Mr. Nkombo states that some of the measures will include ensuring close collaboration between the Kafue Town Council and the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources to harmonize the insurance of plots to the citizens. He adds that the Ministry of Local Government, through the Local Government Service Commission, will take appropriate measures against any member of staff who will be found wanting in the irregular insurance of plots in Kafue. Mr. Nkombo has further issued a stern warning to all councils that his ministry will not hesitate to prosecute any illegalities and penalize anyone found wanting. The opposition Socialist Party President Fred Membe is concerned that cases of malaria are on a frightening rise in northwestern Wapula, northern and Muchinga provinces. Dr. Membe says the situation is fast approaching a crisis point and urgent action is needed. He notes that while Zambia is recognized internationally for its ambitious goal of malaria elimination and for having attained pre-elimination levels in southern province, the country remains a highly endemic to malaria, with the entire population considered to be at risk of contracting malaria. Dr. Membe says Zambia is among the 20 countries with the highest malaria incidence and mortality globally, and that the country carries 2% of the global malaria case burden and 6.1% of the case burden in East and Southern Africa. He states that the risk is highest in the wetter, rural, impoverished provinces of Luapula, northern Muchinga, and northwestern and lowest in Lusaka province and southern province, hence the need for government to urgently do something before many more lives are lost.
Cases of malaria are on a frightening rise in northwestern, Luapula, northern and Muchinga provinces. We are fast approaching a crisis point. Urgent action is needed. We are recognized internationally for our ambitious goal of eliminating malaria and for having attained pre-elimination levels in southern province. Zambia as a whole remains a highly endemic malaria country, with the entire population considered to be at risk of contracting malaria. It is among the 20 countries with the highest malaria.
Giving an update on licensure examinations during a media briefing, HPCZ Registrar and Chief Executive Officer Faston Goma says the 20 have been excluded due to several reasons, including failure to meet the Grade 12 entry criteria, forged Grade 12 results, and submitting uncertified documents. Professor Goma says cases of forgery are a serious breach of the Health Workers Code of Conduct and calls for serious sanctions, including permanent exclusion from the registers, meaning one can never be engaged to practice in Zambia and internationally. He says the council will forward the case to the police for criminal proceedings. Professor Goma states that the purpose of the HPCZ professional licensure examinations is to identify individuals who possesses the minimum knowledge and attributes to practice competently for the benefit of all health service consumers in Zambia. He says the candidates have been selected after a rigorous vetting process in collaboration with different partners, among them the Examinations Council of Zambia, the Higher Education Authority, the Zambia Qualifications Authority, and training institutions.
We had a very good response from the candidates who are due for these examinations. We received close to 2,000 applications, and these candidates then had to pass through a rigorous vetting process, which included the Examinations Council of Zambia verifying their grade 12 certificates, the Higher Education Authority verifying their presence within the training sphere, the Zambia Qualifications Authority for those of our colleagues who qualified from outside Zambia, and the training institutions, of course, had to give us their latest pass lists for us to know where the students were coming from. We should say all of them were successfully entered for the examinations, except for about 20 candidates who were excluded from these examinations for several reasons, including failure to meet the grade 12 entry criteria, meaning they could not obtain index numbers. Some submitted documents which were not certified by legal colleagues.
Still in our local news, Operation Young Vote OIV has called on the police, the church and other stakeholders to come together and come up with an effective approach towards addressing the rising criminal acts by junkies. OIV Executive Director Gessie Nyirenda is concerned with the increasing cases of junkies attacking innocent citizens in different parts of the country, with latest cases recorded in Mongo district of Western Province. Mr. Nyirenda says government and the police must urgently pay attention to this problem. He states that the spirit of junkie attacks in broad daylight has certainly alarmed Mongo residents, adding that it is not only the count which is raising, but the brutality and violence quotient involved in each incident. Republican President Hakainde Hichilema has accorded an official funeral to the late former Cabinet Minister Mwansa Kapea, who died after a short illness on Monday, 13th of February 2023. In a statement, Secretary to the Cabinet, Patrick Kangwa, says that this is in recognition of the invaluable contributions made by Mr. Kapea when he served as Minister of Information and Broadcasting and Minister of Lands and Natural Resources in the PF government. Mr. Kapea says President Hichilema has also declared Thursday, 16th of February 2023, the day on which Mr. Kapea will be put to rest, a day of national mourning. He has advised the public that during the period of national mourning, which will be observed from 06 hours to 18 hours, all activities of entertainment nature on both radio and their use in all Catholic schools in the country is highly commendable and must be emulated by others and supported by all well-meaning Zambians who desire to preserve the chastity of marriage as planned by God to be a union between a man and a woman. Mr. Mwenda says the church in its diversity and the majority of citizens are consistent on their rejection of same-sex marriages, wondering why certain international partners are keen on introducing such practices in Zambia through CSE, which is primarily targeting young people in this country. Mr. Mwenda says that the ZMP party stands with the church in rejecting the new CSE materials and is calling for their revision so that the country's values are safeguarded and not lost to alien practices which may spell doom for the country and its future generation. He says that the UPND government must be seen to protect the interest of citizens by doing that which citizens desire, as opposed to championing the interest of foreign donor partners wishing to impose behavior that have no place in Zambia, which is a Christian nation.
Same-sex marriages have no place in Zambia. He says President Hakainde Hichilema's UPND government must be seen to protect the interest of citizens by doing that which citizens desire, as opposed to championing the interest of foreign donor partners wishing to impose behaviors that have no place in Zambia, which is a Christian nation. President Bwalia says Zambia must prosper party is categorical and consistent on this matter and will never change its stance, urging the UPND government to walk the talk in denouncing alien practices such as same-sex marriages.
The Road Transport and Safety Agency, RTSA, has approved the request by the bus operators to adjust bus fares. RTSA Acting Head of Public Relations, Mukela Mangolwa, says that the changes in the bus fares are effective 9th of February 2023. Mr. Mangolwa says fares for Lusaka Local and other towns have been increased by 1 kwacha, while fares for Lusaka Peri-Urban have been increased by 2 kwacha. He says for Copperbelt and other towns, fares have been increased by 1 kwacha, with inter-mine Peri-Urban Copperbelt fares being increased by 1 kwacha as well. Mr. Mangolwa says intercity long distances fares have been increased by 5%. He has since advised the bus operators to revise and display the bus fare charts in all buses accordingly. Mr. Mangolwa says the adjustment in bus fares comes in the work of the increase in the pump prices by 2 kwacha 73 ngwe per litre of petrol and 2 kwacha 81 ngwe per litre for diesel with effect from 1st of February 2023. Gwembe Member of Parliament Tyson Simuzingili has handed over 6 classroom blocks constructed at a total cost of 1.8 million kwacha using the Constituency Development Fund to the Ministry of Education. The 6 classroom blocks include 4 1x2 and 2 1x3 classroom blocks in various wards of Gwembe constituency. Speaking during the handover ceremony recently, Mr. Simuzingili said the construction of the new classroom blocks has come at a right time when most schools in the district are faced with critical shortage of classroom space owing to high enrollment levels in view of the free education policy. He says that the construction of the classroom blocks has demonstrated how devolution can positively impact people's livelihoods if well implemented. And Mr. Simuzingili has disclosed that the Constituency Development Fund Committee has allocated 3.6 million kwacha for the procurement of desks in order to mitigate the shortage of desks in the district. And Gwembe District Education Standards Officer Dr. Pumulo Silido has commended government for facilitating for the construction of modern school infrastructure using the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. Siavonga District Commissioner Geoffrey Jacopo says that the administration has managed to bring sanity in the manner contracts for government works are awarded. In an interview, Mr. Jacopo says he found a lot of dirty tricks that were being used and only benefited members of the former ruling Patriotic Front (PF) party. He says there is currently transparency in the manner contracts for developmental projects are being awarded, including those under the Constituency Development Fund (CDF). Meanwhile, Mr. Jacopo says lodge owners in the districts have been directed to start giving access to the lake shore to Siavonga residents following several complaints that business owners restrict access to the lake shore. He says the local authority has also been directed to leave up to 50 meters from the lake for people to access the facility as they allocate land to prospecting owners. We now join DW with a roundup of international news.
It's almost a year since Western nations imposed sanctions aimed at reducing Russia's ability to shore up its military. But trade records reveal what's actually happened this past year. Chinese companies have continued and even increased their business ties with Moscow.
Data analysts say there's clear evidence that China has dramatically increased military shipments to Russia since Moscow invaded Ukraine. A network of Chinese defence companies operating directly under the State-Owned Assets Commission has been steadily supplying Russia with military hardware despite international sanctions. Almost 2,000 companies operate within the Polygroup network, including a defence conglomerate called Poly Technologies.
And so what I've identified from the companies that I've been researching is actually an increase in military applicable parts that are explicitly labeled for military systems to Russia from China since the start of the war, and even for a couple months preceding the war. We see about a 300% increase in M171 system parts from Poly Technologies to these Russian defense companies just about a month or two before the invasion started. And most of those shipments are actually during the war itself.
Many of these companies are shipping directly to Russian military hardware companies which are operating in Ukraine. Among the electronics and machinery parts are parts which are explicitly for military use. In October, a company called China Tally Aviation shipped radar parts for the S-400 anti-aircraft system to a Russian defence contractor, Almaz Ante. That transaction was detailed in a Wall Street Journal article based on data from C4 Ads. And between June and November, there were multiple shipments of parts for M171 helicopters, this time Poly Technologies selling to Ulan-Ude Aviation Plant. But because of complex supply chains, it's not just Chinese companies that are implicated.
And we see about 30% of Poly Technologies trade partners have active Western ties in their shipments, either exporting, importing, or countries of origin. And this is really impactful because sanctions measures specifically stipulate that any entity who's trading goods or services or even financially supporting these sanctioned Russian defense companies is potentially at risk for sanctions penalties as well.
That applies even if